A princess who cannot see the stars is not meant to rule them. That was the sentence whispered across half the galaxy whenever the name Illyria surfaced in diplomatic halls and quiet corridors alike. And on the night everything changed, the words echoed once more through the crystalline towers of the Aurelian Orbital Palace, a station so vast it stretched nearly 2 miles across the silent darkness above the pale world of Sirian. From the outside, the palace looked like a ring of glass and silver light suspended in orbit, its surface glowing with thousands of soft blue illumination panels designed to mimic a gentle sunrise for the alien species who called it home. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of ionized metal and cooling circuitry, and the low hum of energy conduits vibrated through the polished floor like the distant sound of thunder rolling across open plains. In the center of the palace rested the bonding chamber, a circular hall nearly 100 feet wide, its ceiling arching overhead like the inside of a cathedral made of living crystal. The floor was etched with delicate geometric patterns that glowed faintly under soft amber lighting, and along the outer ring stood representatives of powerful houses, warriors, scholars, diplomats, and nobles from dozens of star systems, all gathered for a ritual that had once symbolized unity across their empire. Yet tonight there was no celebration in the chamber, only a quiet tension hanging in the air like static before a storm. At the center of the room sat the princess, Princess Illyria of Sirian. She was taller than most humans would expect, her posture elegant despite the silver exoskeletal frame that supported her legs, a delicate structure of curved alloy and translucent energy joints designed to help her stand when her own body could not. Her skin held the soft glow of turquoise glass under moonlight, and long strands of pale silver hair fell across her shoulders like threads of starlight. But her eyes, once described in royal records as mirrors of the cosmos, were clouded now, unfocused and distant, fixed somewhere beyond the walls of the chamber. Illyria could not see the nobles who watched her. She could not see the stars her people had once promised she would rule. She sat with calm composure anyway, hands folded gently in her lap, listening instead to the subtle sounds of the room. The quiet shifting of ceremonial armor, the low murmur of translators embedded in the walls, the faint hiss of environmental regulators adjusting the temperature to a comfortable 72 degrees Fahrenheit for the visiting diplomats from Earth. One by one, the candidates had stepped forward that evening to attempt the ancient neural bond that would link their minds with the royal bloodline, a ritual older than most civilizations still existing in the galaxy. One by one, the attempts had failed. The chamber lights would brighten briefly, the crystalline floor would pulse with scanning energy, and then the silence would return as the candidates stepped back, shaking their head with polite restraint. No bond. The whisper had begun after the 3rd attempt. It grew louder after the 7th. By the 12th, no one even tried to hide it anymore. Defective. The word never reached the princess directly, but it lingered in the air around her like cold fog. High above the chamber, behind a maintenance panel hidden within the upper structure of the station, Daniel Carter tightened the final bolt on a magnetic relay unit and wiped a streak of machine grease across the sleeve of his gray utility jacket. Daniel was 34 years old, 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered from years of hauling equipment through maintenance shafts and service corridors that most diplomats never knew existed. His brown hair had grown a little too long over the past month, and a faint shadow of stubble covered his jaw, the quiet mark of someone who spent more time fixing machines than worrying about formal appearances. On the small diagnostic tablet clipped to his belt, lines of system data scrolled across the screen in steady green text, confirming the stabilization grid beneath the chamber floor was functioning again after a minor power fluctuation earlier that afternoon. Well, Daniel muttered quietly to himself in a relaxed Midwestern accent, tightening the tool in his grip. That should keep the fancy floor lights from freaking out again. He leaned back slightly inside the narrow maintenance crawlspace, glancing through the thin observation slit built into the service wall. From up here, the bonding chamber looked less like a sacred ritual hall and more like an elaborate stage production. Bright lights, ceremonial robes, a lot of nervous people pretending everything was going according to plan. Daniel had worked on the station long enough to recognize the difference between technology and theater, and right now, something about this ritual felt more like the second one. Daniel Carter had spent enough years inside orbital stations to know that machines rarely failed without a reason, and that ceremonies built around technology almost always depended on the machines working exactly as designed. So when the faint ripple of unstable data flashed across his diagnostic tablet again, he frowned slightly and leaned closer to the narrow observation slit carved into the maintenance wall. Below him, the chamber continued its ritual with quiet determination. Another candidate stepped forward across the glowing floor, their ceremonial armor reflecting soft bands of amber light from the crystal ceiling above. The station temperature remained stable at 72 degrees Fahrenheit, the environmental system maintaining a comfortable balance for the mix of alien species gathered inside the hall, yet the tension in the room made the air feel strangely heavy. Daniel watched as the candidate approached the princess and placed their hand on the central interface pillar, a column of transparent crystal threaded with faint blue energy lines. The floor's symbols illuminated gently, scanning patterns moving outward in smooth concentric rings. For a moment the chamber held its breath. Then the light dimmed again. The candidates slowly withdrew their hand. No connection formed. The sound that followed was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was only the quiet shuffle of ceremonial boots across polished crystal as the individuals stepped back toward the outer circle. Yet somehow that small sound echoed through the chamber like a verdict. Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose and tapped his tablet again, pulling up the bonding system diagnostics that fed through the relay he had just repaired. The system reported normal. Power output stable. Neural interface alignment within acceptable parameters. Everything looked correct, which meant something else was wrong. Down in the center of the room, the princess remained still. Princess Illyria did not shift her posture or tilt her head in frustration the way most people might have after 12 failed attempts. She simply sat there with calm patience, her hands resting lightly against the slender frame of the support exoskeleton that curved around her legs. The metal structure emitted a faint humming vibration, subtle enough that most observers would not notice it, but Daniel had spent years listening to machines, and he recognized the sound immediately. That hum was slightly irregular, not broken, not malfunctioning, just imperfectly synchronized. He narrowed his eyes and adjusted the zoom on his tablet camera, focusing on the lower joint where the exoskeleton met the princess's boots. The interface ring pulsed softly, but the timing of the signal did not match the bonding chamber's neural synchronization pattern. Daniel scratched the side of his head thoughtfully. That should not happen. The chamber was built to calibrate automatically to the physiology of whoever entered the bond circle. It was one of the reasons the system was considered revolutionary across the diplomatic worlds. Yet the numbers on his screen suggested a slight mismatch between the chamber interface and the princess's support system. A tiny delay, less than half a second. For ordinary equipment, that delay would not matter. For a neural link designed to synchronize living minds, half a second might as well be a mile. Another attempt began below him. Another noble step forward. Another scan activated. Another quiet failure followed. The whispers returned along the outer ring of observers. Soft voices filtered through translation devices embedded in the chamber walls. Daniel could not understand every alien language drifting through the air, but tone carried meaning just fine without translation. Doubt, pity, embarrassment. None of it seemed to reach the princess directly, but Daniel noticed something else instead. Every time the bonding pulse activated, the exoskeleton signal shifted slightly off rhythm again. Like two musicians trying to play the same song, but starting half a beat apart. Daniel leaned back in the crawl space and folded his arms slowly. He had not come to the chamber tonight to study alien royalty. He was just the maintenance guy who made sure the lights turned on and the floor did not explode during fancy diplomatic events. But machines were honest things. They followed rules. And right now the rules said the bonding system was not completely wrong. It was just slightly out of tune. Daniel glanced once more at the princess sitting quietly in the center of the glowing chamber. Then he looked down at the diagnostic relay he had just repaired, and a quiet thought crossed his mind that no one else in the palace seemed to consider. Maybe the princess was not the problem. Daniel Carter stayed in the narrow maintenance crawl space a few minutes longer than his work order technically required, his tablet balanced on one knee, while lines of diagnostic data continued scrolling across the screen in quiet green text. Below him the ritual was beginning to slow. Even the most patient diplomats eventually reached the point where tradition ran out of volunteers. The glowing rings beneath the chamber floor dimmed slightly as the bonding system shifted to standby mode between attempts. The crystal panels along the walls reflecting soft bands of blue light that moved slowly like ocean waves across the polished surfaces. Daniel tapped the screen again and replayed the synchronization data from the previous attempt. The same delay appeared every time. For 100 milliseconds between the chamber signal and the exoskeleton relay attached to the princess. It was a tiny number on paper, less than half a second, but Daniel had worked around neural calibration systems long enough to know that timing meant everything when technology tried to communicate with a living mind. Half a second could break a connection before it ever began. He leaned forward slightly and glanced through the narrow slit again. The observers along the outer ring were beginning to disperse in small clusters, their voices low and careful as translation fields converted dozens of languages into quiet whispers that blended together like distant wind through tall grass. The ceremony had clearly reached its unspoken conclusion. No one wanted to say it aloud, but the room understood the outcome already. At the center of the chamber, Princess Illyria remained seated in the same calm posture she had held all evening. The faint silver frame supporting her legs hummed gently beneath the ceremonial robes draped across her lap, the soft mechanical rhythm steady and almost comforting. Daniel watched the interface lights pulse across the exoskeleton joints again and shook his head slowly. The machine was good. Whoever designed it knew what they were doing. But it had been calibrated for a human nervous system pattern. The bonding chamber, however, was not built for humans. It was built for Illyria's species. Two systems trying to help the same person, both slightly out of alignment with each other. Daniel sighed quietly and shut off the diagnostic scan. He knew exactly what the issue was now. The real question was whether anyone down there would listen to a maintenance engineer about it. A soft tone sounded from the chamber floor below as the system officially powered down for the night. One of the tall alien attendants approached the princess and spoke in a gentle voice that carried easily through the quiet room. Daniel could not understand the exact language, but the tone held unmistakable formality. The ceremony was finished. Chairs along the observation ring began retracting into the polished floor, and the ambient lighting dimmed another level as the palace shifted into late evening energy mode. The princess slowly reached forward and placed her hand against the support rail of her exoskeleton. The motion was careful and practiced, the kind of movement someone repeated thousands of times until muscle memory replaced sight. The mechanical frame responded with a soft hum as it lifted her smoothly to a standing position. Even from his hidden vantage point, Daniel could see that the movement required effort. Not dramatic effort, just the quiet determination of someone who had learned how to live with limitations without letting them define every step. Illyria stood there for a moment in the center of the enormous chamber while the observers continued filing toward the exits. For the first time all evening the room felt large around her. Empty. Daniel hesitated. Technically his job was finished. The relay unit worked. The bonding floor would not short out tomorrow morning. He could climb back through the service tunnels and return to the maintenance deck 2 levels above, where a lukewarm cup of coffee was probably still waiting on his workstation. Instead, he found himself opening the crawlspace panel quietly and lowering himself down the service ladder toward the chamber floor. His boots touched the polished crystal with a soft click that echoed gently across the wide circular room. Illyria tilted her head slightly in his direction, her clouded eyes unfocused, but her hearing clearly sharp enough to catch the sound of a single step in a silent hall. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck and glanced at the glowing patterns embedded in the floor before finally clearing his throat. While he said in a calm voice that carried the easy tone of someone used to talking to strangers in machine rooms and maintenance corridors, "I think I might have found a small problem with your equipment." Princess Illyria did not react with surprise when Daniel spoke, which was the first thing that caught his attention. Most people, when addressed unexpectedly by a stranger in an empty ceremonial hall, would at least turn quickly or demand an explanation. Illyria only tilted her head slightly, as if the direction of his voice painted a quiet picture in her mind. The silver strands of her hair shifted softly across her shoulders as she listened. The faint mechanical hum from the support frame around her legs continued its steady rhythm. a gentle vibration that echoed lightly through the polished crystal floor beneath Daniel's boots. For a moment, the enormous chamber felt strangely calm now that the crowd had gone. The towering crystal arches overhead glowed with low evening illumination, their light dimmed to a soft twilight blue that simulated the slow setting of Sirian's distant sun. Daniel cleared his throat again and stepped a little closer, careful to keep his voice relaxed and respectful. "I am Daniel Carter," he said, "station maintenance engineer. I was repairing a relay unit above the chamber earlier tonight." Illyria listened quietly, her expression composed. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a calm musical tone that filled the empty hall without needing to be raised. "A maintenance engineer," she repeated gently. "Then you are the one responsible for ensuring the ritual floor did not malfunction during the ceremony." Daniel gave a small half-smile, even though she could not see it. That was the plan. The princess rested one hand lightly against the curved support rail of her exoskeleton, as if grounding herself against the quiet space around her. "You said you found a problem," she said. "Many specialists have examined the equipment. Their conclusion is always the same." She paused for a brief second before finishing the sentence. "The problem is me." The words were spoken calmly, without bitterness, which somehow made them feel heavier in the silent chamber. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck again, thinking about how to answer. "Respectfully," he said slowly, "I do not think that is accurate." Illyria's head tilted slightly again, curiosity flickering behind the stillness of her clouded eyes. Daniel crouched down beside the lower ring of the bonding platform and tapped a small control panel embedded in the floor. A thin line of diagnostic light glowed along the etched geometric patterns, barely visible beneath the polished crystal surface. "Your exoskeleton is excellent technology," he continued, "but it was calibrated using a neural timing standard that does not match the bonding chamber synchronization." Pulse. The princess remained still, listening carefully as if the explanation itself were a map she could follow through sound alone. Daniel pointed to the glowing line along the floor, even though he knew the gesture meant nothing to her sightless gaze. "The chamber sends a neural handshake signal every time someone attempts a bond," he explained. "Your support system receives that signal a fraction of a second too late." He paused briefly, then added in a quieter tone, "About 400 milliseconds." Illyria's fingers tightened slightly around the support rail. It was the smallest motion Daniel had seen from her all evening. 400 milliseconds, she repeated softly. "Less than half a second." "Exactly," Daniel said. "That delay breaks the synchronization before the connection can stabilize." The chamber remained silent for several seconds after he finished speaking. Far above them, a distant environmental regulator hummed quietly as it adjusted airflow through the station's ventilation system. Finally, Illyria spoke again. "Many scientists have studied this chamber," she said. "They concluded that my condition prevents the bond." Daniel stood up slowly and brushed a bit of dust from his sleeve. "Scientists sometimes focus on the most complicated explanation first," he said. "Engineers usually start with the simplest one." Illyria turned her face slightly toward him again. "And what would your simple explanation be, Mr. Carter?" Daniel looked down at the glowing lines beneath the crystal floor, then back toward the princess. His answer came without hesitation. "Your equipment is out of sync with the chamber," he said. "Not you." The quiet statement lingered in the chamber long after Daniel finished speaking. Princess Illyria remained still, the faint hum of her support frame continuing its gentle rhythm, as if the machine itself were thinking about his words. Above them, the vast ceiling of crystalline panels glowed in calm twilight colors, simulating the final hour of daylight on Sirian's surface nearly 12,000 miles below the station. The palace was beginning to transition into night cycle, and the soft lighting cast long reflections across the polished bonding floor like ripples on a still lake. For several seconds, Illyria did not respond. Then she released a slow breath that Daniel had not realized she was holding. "If what you say is correct," she said carefully, "then the failure of the ritual is not inevitable." Daniel shrugged slightly. "From an engineering standpoint, nothing is inevitable. It just means the calibration is wrong." The princess turned her head a little more toward him, listening to the subtle movements of his boots on the crystal floor. "And you believe you can correct this calibration?" It was not quite a question. Daniel hesitated for the first time since climbing down from the maintenance shaft. "I believe I can try," he answered honestly. But the bonding chamber is not exactly part of my normal maintenance schedule. Adjusting the timing interface would require access to the core's synchronization grid. Illyria considered that quietly. Her fingers moved slightly along the curved rail of the exoskeleton, tracing the smooth alloy surface as if reading its shape through touch alone. Many technicians have examined the system, she said after a moment. Each one assured the Royal Council that the equipment was functioning exactly as designed. Daniel gave a small chuckle that echoed lightly in the empty chamber. I am sure they did. Specialists tend to trust the design specifications. Engineers tend to question them. The princess's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You sound very certain for someone standing inside a ceremonial hall he was not invited into. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck again, a habit he seemed to rely on whenever he realized how strange a situation had become. Yeah, he admitted. That part of the evening definitely did not appear on my work order. For the first time since he entered the chamber, a faint hint of amusement touched Illyria's voice. You climbed down from the ceiling during a royal ritual to diagnose a problem no one else detected. Pretty much, Daniel said. The princess remained quiet for another moment, then slowly shifted her stance. The exoskeleton adjusted smoothly beneath her weight, releasing a soft mechanical tone as the stabilization servos recalibrated. If the synchronization delay truly exists, she said thoughtfully, then it means every attempt tonight failed before it ever began. Daniel nodded automatically before remembering she could not see the gesture. That is what the data suggests. Illyria lifted her face slightly toward the unseen stars beyond the station walls. For 3 years the council has searched for an explanation, she said softly. Many concluded that I was simply incompatible with the ritual. Daniel looked at the glowing patterns on the bonding floor again, imagining the tiny delay repeating itself with every attempt. Sometimes the difference between impossible and possible is only a few milliseconds, he said. The princess turned her head back toward him. And if you are wrong? Daniel smiled a little, the easy confidence of someone who had spent his life fixing machines returning to his voice. Then I will have confirmed what the experts already believe, he said. But if I am right, he glanced down at the interface ring embedded in the floor. Then no one in this galaxy ever gave the system enough time to work properly. The quiet chamber seemed to hold that thought in the air between them. Finally, Illyria spoke again, her tone steady but carrying the faintest trace of something new. Hope. Mr. Carter, she said, would you be willing to attempt this recalibration? Daniel looked up at the towering crystal ceiling once more, then back at the princess standing alone in the center of the vast chamber. His answer came without hesitation. Yes, he said simply. Daniel Carter had repaired machines in zero-gravity cargo bays, underground reactor tunnels, and once inside the rotating spine of a mining platform that rattled like a washing machine set to the wrong cycle. But standing in the center of a royal bonding chamber, while a blind alien princess waited for his answer, was easily the strangest maintenance request he had ever accepted. The chamber lights continued their slow transition into night mode, dimming another level until the crystal walls glowed with soft blue reflections like moonlight on water. Daniel walked toward the circular interface column in the middle of the floor and knelt beside it, opening the thin access panel along its base. A small row of diagnostic ports lit up instantly, recognizing the presence of a maintenance tablet. All right, he said quietly while connecting the cable from his tablet to the interface port. Let us see how stubborn this thing really is. Lines of system code began scrolling across the screen as the chamber awakened from standby. The geometric patterns embedded in the crystal floor flickered softly as power returned to the synchronization grid beneath them. Behind him, he heard the gentle movement of the exoskeleton frame as Illyria adjusted her stance. The mechanical servos responded smoothly, emitting a faint harmonic tone that Daniel now recognized clearly as the slightly mistimed signal he had noticed earlier. Do you require assistance? The princess asked calmly. Daniel shook his head before, remembering again that she could not see the gesture. No assistance needed yet, he replied. But I do need you to step onto the center ring if you can. Illyria nodded slightly and guided herself forward using the quiet memory of the chamber's layout. Her boots touched the glowing circle at the center of the floor with a soft tap that echoed lightly through the vast hall. The exoskeleton stabilized immediately, adjusting its balance sensors as she came to a stop. Daniel watched the timing data on his tablet as the chamber initiated its baseline scan. The delay appeared instantly, just as he expected. 400 milliseconds. He tapped several commands into the system and opened the synchronization module used to coordinate neural signals between the chamber and a participant's nervous system. Okay, he murmured while studying the code. Your support frame is receiving the bonding pulse slightly late, and then correcting itself after the signal has already passed. Illyria listened closely, her head angled toward his voice. Is the delay correctable? She asked. Daniel leaned closer to the interface panel, adjusting the relay offset with careful precision. Yes, he said after a moment. But whoever programmed the chamber assumed no external neural assist system would ever be connected to the participant. The princess gave a quiet, thoughtful response. My condition required the exoskeleton to remain active during the ceremony. Exactly, Daniel said. Which means the bonding system and the support frame are both trying to talk to your nervous system at the same time, but they are not following the same clock. He entered another command and waited while the system recalibrated the relay sequence. Beneath Illyria's feet, the crystal floor brightened slightly as the chamber adjusted to the new timing offset. The hum from her exoskeleton shifted almost imperceptibly, the sound smoothing into a more stable rhythm. Daniel watched the data feed for several seconds before slowly nodding to himself. That is better, he said. Illyria noticed the change immediately even without seeing it. The vibration feels different, she said quietly. Daniel smiled at that. That is a good sign, he replied. The systems are finally agreeing with each other. The chamber lights pulsed softly again as the bonding interface completed its recalibration. Daniel disconnected his tablet from the port and stood up, brushing dust from his jacket sleeve. All right, he said. The delay should be gone. Now, Illyria stood perfectly still within the glowing ring, listening to the faint energy hum spreading through the chamber floor beneath her boots. For the first time since the ceremony began that evening, the silence in the vast crystal hall felt different. Not empty. Expectant. For a long moment nothing dramatic happened, which was exactly how most important changes in complex machines actually began. The bonding chamber did not explode with light or shake with energy. Instead, the glowing patterns beneath the crystal floor shifted into a smoother rhythm, their pulses moving outward in quiet concentric waves that matched the gentle hum of the recalibrated synchronization grid. Daniel Carter stood beside the interface column watching the diagnostic display on his tablet while the system ran its first full neural alignment test. The numbers scrolling across the screen looked different now. Cleaner. Stable. The 400 millisecond delay that had haunted every earlier attempt was gone. The bonding chamber and the princess's exoskeleton were finally operating on the same clock. Across the glowing ring, Princess Illyria remained perfectly still, listening to the subtle changes spreading through the room. Even without sight, she sensed the difference immediately. The vibration under her boots was no longer uneven. The soft mechanical hum surrounding her legs had settled into a calm, continuous tone that matched the chamber's energy field. She drew a slow breath and released it carefully. The chamber feels quieter, she said softly. Daniel glanced up from the tablet. That is a good description, he replied. The systems are no longer arguing with each other. Illyria tilted her head slightly, as if considering the idea of machines arguing. For 3 years, every attempt ended before it truly began, she said. And all that time the cause may have been a fraction of a second. Daniel rested his tablet against the interface column and folded his arms loosely. Timing matters more than people think, he said, especially when technology tries to listen to a living mind. The chamber lights brightened a little as the system completed its recalibration cycle. Thin streams of blue light moved through the crystal floor like distant lightning beneath clear ice, spreading outward from the central ring where Illyria stood. Daniel tapped a command into his tablet and initiated a low-level bonding handshake test, the same sequence used during the opening phase of the earlier ceremony. The chamber responded. Immediately, a soft pulse of energy rose through the floor, gentle enough to feel more like warmth than electricity. Illyria felt it at once. Her fingers tightened slightly around the curved rail of the exoskeleton as the energy field touched her nervous system. The sensation was unfamiliar. During previous attempts, the signal had always collapsed before she could perceive it clearly. Now it lingered, a quiet presence brushing the edges of her thoughts like the faint echo of distant music. "Mr. Carter," she said slowly, her voice carrying a trace of wonder she had not allowed herself in years. "The signal is still there." Daniel looked down at the tablet again. The synchronization graph on the screen displayed two smooth, overlapping waveforms instead of the jagged, mismatched lines he had seen earlier. "Yes," he answered quietly. "It is holding." Illyria stood motionless in the center of the glowing circle while the chamber continued its gentle neural handshake sequence. For the first time since her accident, the ancient system designed to link royal minds with chosen partners was actually reaching her. The connection was incomplete, of course. No bond had formed yet, but the signal was no longer failing instantly. It was waiting. Daniel watched the data for several seconds before speaking again. "The system is ready now," he said. Illyria turned her face toward the direction of his voice. "Ready for what?" Daniel glanced at the central ring beneath her feet, and then at the glowing interface column beside him. His tone remained calm, but there was a quiet seriousness behind it. "Ready for someone to attempt the bond again." The enormous chamber remained silent except for the gentle hum of synchronized machines. Illyria understood the implication immediately. The royal candidates had already left. The ceremony was over. There was only one other person standing inside the bonding circle now. The maintenance engineer who had fixed the timing of a broken ritual. Daniel Carter shifted his weight slightly and gave a small, uncertain shrug even though she could not see the gesture. "I mean," he added carefully, "if you would like to test whether the recalibration actually worked." The quiet suggestion hung in the air between them like the first drop of rain before a storm that had waited years to arrive. Princess Illyria did not answer immediately. The energy field beneath her feet continued its gentle pulse through the crystal floor, steady and patient, as though the ancient chamber itself had decided it could afford to wait a little longer. Daniel Carter stood beside the interface column, one hand resting on the edge of the control panel while the other loosely held his diagnostic tablet. On the screen, the synchronization graph remained perfectly aligned, two calm waveforms rising and falling together in smooth rhythm. For the first time since the system had been activated that evening, there was no error message, no sudden collapse of signal, no mechanical disagreement between technology and biology. The chamber was simply ready. Illyria listened to the faint energy hum spreading outward beneath her boots. Without sight, her world was defined by sound, vibration, and the subtle shifts in air pressure around her. Tonight the chamber felt different from every previous attempt. The signal was no longer slipping away before she could recognize it. It was present, waiting. She turned her face slightly toward Daniel's voice. "You are not of my people," she said quietly. Daniel gave a small shrug that rustled the fabric of his maintenance jacket. "That is definitely true," he replied. "And I am also not technically on the list of approved ceremonial candidates." The princess considered that for a moment. The corners of her lips moved just slightly, almost forming a smile. The council would consider this highly unconventional. Daniel glanced around the vast empty hall, the glowing floor and towering crystal arches reflecting pale blue light across the quiet chamber. "Well," he said lightly, "it has already been a pretty unconventional evening." The silence returned again, but this time it felt lighter, almost curious. Illyria took a careful step forward inside the glowing circle. The exoskeleton adjusted smoothly beneath her, stabilizing her balance as the chamber responded to the movement. The light patterns beneath the floor brightened slightly, acknowledging the presence of a participant within the bonding ring. Daniel watched the system indicators shift into active mode on his tablet. The neural handshake signal strengthened automatically, preparing to link two nervous systems if a second participant entered the circle. Illyria extended one hand slowly into the open space between them. She could not see Daniel standing a few feet away, but she could sense his presence through the subtle warmth of the energy field surrounding him. "You repaired the system," she said softly, "but the bond requires two minds." Daniel looked at the outstretched hand, then back at the glowing ring beneath the princess's feet. He had spent most of his life solving mechanical problems, not participating in ancient alien rituals. Yet the engineer in him recognized when an experiment had reached the stage where theory needed to become practice. He stepped forward. His boots crossed the faint boundary of the bonding circle with a quiet click against the polished crystal floor. Instantly, the chamber reacted. The geometric patterns embedded beneath the surface illuminated more brightly, sending a smooth ripple of blue light across the entire room. Daniel felt the change at once. A warm pressure touched the edge of his thoughts, not invasive or overwhelming, but present, like standing close to a quiet radio signal just beginning to tune into a clear frequency. Illyria felt it as well. The faint energy brushing her mind suddenly strengthened, steady and unmistakably real. Her hand trembled slightly in the air between them, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar certainty that the signal had not disappeared this time. Daniel reached forward and gently took her hand. The moment their skin touched, the chamber responded with a deeper harmonic tone, the synchronization grid beneath the floor aligning perfectly with both of their nervous systems. The energy field brightened around them, flowing outward like quiet starlight spreading across the crystal hall. For the first time since the ritual had ever been attempted with her, the connection did not collapse. It held. The chamber answered the contact with silence first, the deep kind of silence that follows when two systems finally stop resisting each other. The light beneath the crystal floor did not flash or surge wildly. Instead, it grew steady and clear, the geometric lines forming a calm network of glowing paths that spread outward in perfect symmetry from the center of the bonding circle. Daniel Carter felt the change immediately. The warm pressure brushing the edges of his thoughts no longer felt distant or uncertain. It settled into a quiet presence, gentle and balanced, like two instruments finally tuning to the same note. He did not hear Illyria's thoughts and words. It was not like that. What he sensed instead was awareness, a calm and luminous intelligence touching his mind with careful curiosity. Illyria felt it too. For years, every attempt had collapsed before this moment could exist. The signal had always broken before it formed into something stable. But now the connection remained. The chamber's ancient synchronization grid held both neural patterns together with patient precision, aligning the rhythms of two entirely different species as if the system had been waiting centuries for exactly this configuration. Illyria's fingers tightened slightly around Daniel's hand, not from fear, but from astonishment. The chamber's quiet hum vibrated gently through the support frame around her legs, the exoskeleton responding smoothly to the perfectly synchronized energy field. Her clouded eyes remained unfocused. Yet for the first time since the accident that had taken her sight, she experienced something that felt remarkably close to vision. Not images, not shapes, but awareness of another mind beside her. Daniel's presence felt steady, warm, grounded in a way the royal candidates earlier that evening had never reached. The connection did not strain or resist. It simply existed. Daniel let out a slow breath he had not realized he was holding. "Well," he murmured softly, his voice echoing gently through the vast chamber. "That definitely looks like a successful test." Illyria laughed quietly, a sound so light it almost disappeared in the wide crystal hall. "A test," she repeated. "My people have attempted this ritual for 3 years." Daniel glanced down at the glowing floor patterns surrounding their feet. The synchronization graph on his tablet now displayed two perfectly overlapping waveforms moving together in smooth rhythm. No delay, no interference, no failure. "From an engineering perspective," he said, "I would call this proof of concept." Illyria tilted her head slightly, focusing on the steady presence within the bond. The connection allowed her to sense Daniel's calm confidence, the quiet practicality that shaped the way his mind approached every problem. There was no ambition inside it, no desire for status or recognition, only the simple satisfaction of something working the way it was meant to. The realization brought a soft expression to her face. "All this time," she said slowly, "the council searched for a warrior, a noble, or a prodigy." Daniel smiled faintly even though she could not see it. "Turns out you just needed a maintenance guy who noticed the timing was off." The chamber lights continued their gentle glow as the bond stabilized completely. Far beyond the palace walls, thousands of stars burned across the black sky above Sirian. Illyria lifted her face slightly toward that unseen universe, still holding Daniel's hand within the glowing circle. Through the quiet connection, she could sense the way his mind remembered the stars, the way he imagined their light crossing impossible distances through space. For the first time since losing her sight, she did not feel separated from that vast sky. She was connected to someone who could see it for her. After a moment she spoke again, her voice calm and certain. "Tell me something, Daniel Carter." He glanced toward her with easy curiosity. "Sure." Illyria's fingers tightened gently around his hand as the synchronized chamber hummed softly around them. "What do the stars look like tonight?" Daniel looked up toward the high crystal ceiling that separated the chamber from the infinite darkness above. Then he answered in the same steady voice he used for everything else in life. "Bright," he said. "Bright enough for both of us."